Here's your host, Alex Garrett.
Well, welcome inside to the adapting side of Alex Garrett podcasting. And adapting, yes, we're all working toward that now as we're sort of seeing this pandemic restrictions be lifted. And I don't think I could welcome a better guest than the Pacific Legal Foundation. They've been on with me before. In fact, Daniel Ortner, I believe you've been on with me before talking about New York State restrictions, haven't you?
I believe that's right.
So from when we last talked, we kind of talked about how Cuomo was possibly, most likely, violating constitutional rights with all these lockdown measures. And even with the reopenings, Pacific Legal says that's still going on. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so we took over a lawsuit that was filed in the fall of last year by small theaters and comedy clubs in New York City. The theaters and comedy clubs were shut down for all of last year. They were only allowed to reopen just at the beginning of April, so it was more than a full year of being shut down. And throughout that time, similar venues and businesses were allowed to open in far greater capacity than they were. For instance, bars and restaurants could have live music or live performers, but they couldn't have a small theater performance. So there was a lot of double standards at work. Recently, the changes, it was such that the theaters that we represent, a couple of them have religious meetings, churches or synagogues meeting in the same space, and you could have on Sunday morning, church service could have a greater number of people at the church service, and 2 hours later, fewer people could attend a Sunday matinee. So it was absolutely illogical and hypocritical, and so that's why we took over this lawsuit. And now the capacity limits are finally lifting, but there's still some unequal treatment in terms of the health and safety restrictions that have been in place, greater distancing requirements and masking and other seating requirements put on the small theaters compared to churches or other businesses. So the unequal treatment is continuing even now. So we are just standing up for the principle of equal treatment. The First Amendment rights cannot be discriminated against based on your preference, the type of speech that you like.
And so how have you guys been doing with the suit? How's the progress? And I've often wondered if one of these lawsuits could actually get to the Supreme Court. I don't know if this is going to be one of them, but is there something that could be challenged in the court, Supreme Court of Governor Cuomo's?
I think absolutely. Yeah, I think absolutely. So this case, so we just took over this case recently. It was filed back in October of last year, and basically there was a motion for preliminary injunction, and then that was withdrawn by previous counsel when some of the policies changed. So there haven't been any decisions in the case yet. We think we have a good chance of getting some relief for our clients, as long as there's continue to be unequal treatment by the city and state of New York. This is an important issue that we think has a good chance of going to the Supreme Court if the court decides on it. The Supreme Court ruled against Governor Cuomo and against Governor Newsom in California and against others regarding church closures. Basically said that if you're treating churches worse than other comparable secular businesses, you have to justify that under strict scrutiny, which is the hardest standard of review for government action. It's a standard that governments rarely meet. We think the same principle applies here when other businesses and churches and other activities are being treated better than theatrical performances. The same thing applies. Strict scrutiny applies to the government's actions. They have to prove why this is necessary to treat theaters differently and worse, and we don't think they'll be able to do so.
Well, any other aspects of the city? Because I also know that getting the theaters back open in a safe capacity has been an issue. Has that been talked about in the suit at all? And what's the arguments for reopening with safety standards? Anything there that we could talk about? Yeah,
I think the argument is, really this case is about equal treatment ultimately. If a restaurant or a church service can have a certain number of people, the same should apply to small theaters. There's no reason to treat them differently. Right now, obviously, we're seeing easing of restrictions as vaccinations increase and the rate of COVID goes down. And so we're really demanding just equal treatment ultimately for these theaters. They've done everything right to be safe. They installed new air filtration equipment. They've installed plexiglass barriers. They've put hand sanitizing stations everywhere, all the things that you expect the business to do to be able to stay open. And, part of the problem has been from the beginning, there's been certain things are viewed as essential and other things are viewed as not essential. But theatrical performances are a protected right under the First Amendment. They're an artistic form that gets First Amendment protections. And so the government shouldn't be able to say that activity is not essential. And that's been a problem from the beginning. And, it's gone on for a full year, more than a year, where they've been treated worse. And if restrictions come back, the same thing is going to happen again because the government obviously thinks they can do this.
Well, yeah, they do. And that's the scary part of all of this. They can pull the switch once. How many times can they pull a switch, right, Daniel? That's a big concern. I like the whole... Go for it.
Oh, no, I was going to say that part of the problem has been the policies have been so arbitrary. Originally New York had a 4-tier reopening scheme where certain businesses were in different tiers, and theaters were in the same in tier 4, the last tier, along with indoor restaurants and some other activities. Turned out those were allowed to open. Restaurants were allowed to reopen, bars and indoors, and theaters were left out for no reason. No explanation why. So it's been just arbitrary treatment throughout. Not really rational, not really, the government doesn't have to explain itself. That's part of the problem with this rule by executive order that's been happening over the past year plus. Governors make policy overnight without any need to explain to the public what they're doing and why they're doing it, and it subverts the normal process of lawmaking, which should be through the legislator, where there's room for vigorous debate and discussion and influence. Then even when the governor or an agency makes policy, they have to explain it to the public. They have to go through a notice and comment rulemaking process, get public feedback. None of that's been happening for the whole year of the pandemic. All the most important decisions in states, states all across the country, have been made by one person or a small group of bureaucrats that are appointed by that governor, and there's just no public accountability. And that needs to stop.
Well, it does. And, especially now with Cuomo, how is he not in any legal trouble with everything that's been coming out? Do you foresee with the book deal, with the harassment, with all this, could it hit legally, or is this going to have to be a political decision now that people have to make?
Yeah, I don't know if there are any legal consequences that anything he's violated. I can't speak on that. I do hope there will be political consequences for all of this. You've had governors, really going out of their way to shut businesses down for months on end, and I hope that there will be some reckoning for that.
Have nursing homes? Have people who've lost families in nursing homes? Have they contacted Pacific Legal at all, or have you guys been involved with fighting for those people as well?
That's not really something we would be involved with for fighting for damages. I know there are law firms that have been involved with that issue, but it's not something we'd be involved with. What we usually do is when governments are violating rights, we stop them from doing so, get relief, to prevent government misconduct and unlawful activity. So we're fighting to stop the government from continuing to do things that violate rights.
Well, it's good to hear that New York's been on your radar and they've had you on their radar, because I know that Pacific Legal is obviously out there in the West, but having you guys here, I think, brings some comfort. So, people may not know this, but you guys have also argued in the Supreme Court, right? Tell us a little about those experiences, if you've had any.
Yeah, we've actually had 14 cases before the United States Supreme Court. Actually, 15 now. We had one this term we're waiting on. We've won 12 of those cases. We're expecting another win this year. We had a very important property rights case, the Cedar Point case, which was about the state of California saying that property owners had to let the union organizers onto their property uncompensated for hours and hours on end, many times a year. And so we argue and believe the Supreme Court's going to rule in our favor that is a taking, the government physically occupying your property, forcing others you to allow others on your property. So we have that case at the Supreme Court. We've had cases, free speech cases, property rights cases, separation of powers cases, a variety of cases that we've litigated and been very successful in our efforts to win at the Supreme Court.
All right, change of administrations. How is that affecting legal practices for you guys? I feel like that could be ramping up legal practices for you guys because, aren't we seeing an infringement on rights by the Biden administration here and there, or more than just here and there?
Yeah, there are certain areas where there's really a ramp up. I think the biggest one that I'm very involved with personally is race discrimination. Policies by the Biden administration that actively take race into account and discriminate on the basis of race. We just filed a lawsuit today, actually, in Florida, challenging the farm loans forgiveness program. The Biden administration says if you're a socially disadvantaged farmer, you get your loans forgiven, and they define that only based on race. So the only qualification is you are a racial minority. If you're a white farmer, you're out of luck, no matter how poor you are, no matter how much you need forgiveness. So we have filed a lawsuit today challenging that program. There are going to be many more of those types of lawsuits to come. The Biden administration is relentlessly pursuing race-based measures. So that I think is the biggest area that we've seen like a real change from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. Is that this relentless focus on the use of race, pushing critical race theory in the classrooms and such as well. We're keeping a close eye on that. But we see a lot of concern over that. Really, the guarantee of the Constitution is equal treatment for all, regardless of race. And the Biden administration doesn't really understand that. They think that special treatment is justified, and we're going to continue to fight back against that principle.
Well, that is intense. I mean, look here in New York. I don't know if you dealt with it, but we've had, these schools. Well, only one or two, not everyone can make a special school or gifted and talented. It has to be one or two certain sectors. You notice that? I don't know if you guys have been fighting that as well, but
yeah, well, we actually have a lawsuit in New York right now against Mayor de Blasio's policies regarding magnet specialty school admissions. Discrimination against Asian students, especially. These programs are often, and we have another lawsuit in Virginia, and friends of TJ being one of the most successful specialty schools in the country. These policies that are intended to be leveling the playing field, but really what they're doing is dramatically discriminating against Asians, and that's really the whole point of them. They're designed to reduce the Asian student population and the white student population, but really Asians are the main group that's harmed by these policies. So we've been very active in that. We have several lawsuits challenging those types of policies, and we've seen an increase of that. Fortunately, this idea that you need to sacrifice academic quality, you need to sacrifice meritocracy in order to promote group identity, and that's really contrary to the ideal of individualism and the idea that everyone should be judged based on their own merits and talents and not based on their group identity.
It seems like we're a country of a quota now, and I think that's going to be dangerous moving forward, and I'm sure you guys at Pacific Legal would agree. Daniel, I'm not totally a quote unquote gun guy. I don't have one, but I do believe in constitutional rights, and I feel like we're going to see a lot of those cases too popping up here.
Mm-hmm. That's not an issue that we deal with at Pacific Legal Foundation, but I think generally speaking, there's a real danger of rights being undermined. The idea I mentioned individualism, and I think that's really the key is individual rights, protecting individuals in their choices, in their livelihoods, and their right to speak freely. It really is a danger. We see increased effort to go after people if they don't think like you, if they say things that are offensive or not correct. To go after people for that.
Well,
it's a really alarming trend.
Yeah, let's go back to New York for that. I don't know if you guys have covered this, but obviously Cuomo was targeting who gets the vaccines and who doesn't. If you're not on Cuomo's side, you won't get the vaccines. How is that not an illegal issue? I feel like it could be. Yeah,
I think it will be. We saw the same thing in California, actually even more blatantly in California, where it was certain areas that were minority heavy got more doses of the vaccine, whether they needed it or not. It wasn't based on the actual need of how many people were requesting vaccines. So you had doses wasted being sent to places where there wasn't enough demand, and you had places that had high demand for vaccines being denied, people not being given enough doses. It was just a really illogical policy, and it slowed down the state's vaccination plans by several weeks. So really irresponsible and likely unlawful if they're doing it on the basis of race.
Exactly. Well, let me see here. So Daniel, the other thing about all of these different situational things is, well, it just hurts New Yorkers. And the reason why I wanted to bring onto the adapting side is, yes, the legal system can help you adapt to what's going on by fighting it, right? Daniel.
Well, what we do at Pacific Legal Foundation is we help individuals whose rights are being violated. We represent them pro bono, so for free, to fight back and help them to win against the government when their rights are violated. We honor the brave people who stand up and fight and say, I don't want my rights being trampled on. I am willing to stand up and fight, and we help them do so. That's our job. We help people to stand up and to fight back and to win and back against government overreach.
I've often wondered, because I always think NIMBY, not my backyard, and, anti-government, in a sense, is always on the right side. But I feel like liberals have also gotten a wake-up call, haven't they? I mean, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that, but it seems that liberals have gotten also a wake-up call that, yeah, your party's not helping you, and maybe they're waking up to that.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. Really, what I hope people realized over the past several years is that oversized government is a problem for everyone. When the party you like is in power, you might have things you like happen, but when things change, and they always do, when the party you oppose is in power, they're going to enact policies you don't like. And the best remedy is a government that is checked, that is limited in size, that is accountable, that protects rights and does not infringe on them. That's the best remedy for everyone. And so I hope that people will see that. I'm confident that many people realize that, even though there's always a relentless push, this administration to push more aggressively, to enact more and more regulations and laws that violate rights. So I'm hopeful that people are waking up and seeing that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I feel like it does cross party lines, the infringement. So I'm sure under Trump's administration, you did have some cases that maybe weren't talked about as much, but I'm sure you guys still had some federal cases to deal with. Yeah,
of course. I mean, every administration does things that are unlawful. Each side has their own ways that they infringe on rights and things that they do better or worse than others. I think what we need is a refocus on rights and individualism ultimately. But individual rights are guaranteed by the Constitution. We have liberty. The founding principles found in the Declaration, found in the Constitution, are all men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These rights that we have that we need to protect and fight back on, those are individual rights, not group rights, not collective rights, but individual rights. And we need to get a renewed appreciation for that.
I feel like you guys are going up against an activist legal system, right? So do you find that at all? Do you find that you're dealing with people who might have a bias on the jury? It feels like a valid question to ask nowadays.
We don't have a lot of jury trials, but judges, vary a lot on the spectrum. Right now, there are a lot of very good appointees. I think President Trump, one of his main accomplishments, I'd say my number one accomplishment from him was the appointment of really stellar judges at the Supreme Court and elsewhere. So it's helped a lot, actually. I think for a lot of judges that he's appointed are very open to our arguments we make and thoughtful about them. So it's an encouraging time to be litigating on many of our issues. The Supreme Court itself on many issues like free speech has never been better. There's never been a better Supreme Court for protection of free speech, for protection of religious freedom, for protection of individual rights and individualism. The Supreme Court is the best ever been on many, many issues. So I find it a very encouraging time to be litigating. That might change with new appointees, but right now it's a very, very good time to be fighting for freedom, ultimately.
Now, I got to be honest here, one reason I wanted you guys on, and I don't think you guys can weigh in on this, is I want people to know the FBI has been seizing heirlooms, coins, cash from hundreds of safe deposit boxes in Beverly Hills, despite knowing some. So my whole thing when I read that, when they seize things, even though they could be belong to honest citizens, it's just, is this administration going to go away from warrants and just keep going in there and doing these things? It feels kind of wild to read a headline like that.
Is this like a forfeiture of assets you're talking about?
Well, yeah, the FBI sees heirlooms, coins, and cash from hundreds of safe deposit boxes in Beverly Hills. It's crazy.
This is one area where the Trump administration did do some reforms on civil asset forfeiture. The government can't take your assets when they're bringing a case against you, until they prove their case, essentially, or have some proof that they need to take away your assets. That's an important principle. It's not one that we're very involved with directly, but it's one that I know the Trump administration made some good strides on, and I'm hopeful that those will keep being cemented, and they're not going to be undone completely. So I think that's an important principle that you're entitled to due process. The government can't take away what you have before it's proven their case against you. And when they try to do so, it tilts the playing field. If you can't afford an attorney, then you can't afford to live your life. You're going to be pressured to settle really quickly, and it's really unfair to litigants. So it's a practice I think that needs reform, significant reform.
Well, whenever I hear the Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment could be violated, my ears perk up. I'm like, I got a legal person on that, because how can we even allow that, and how can we fight it, I guess, would be my bigger question.
Yeah, I think a big part of that would be fighting in states, actually. There's a lot of, the federal government does some of this, but it's actually states are the big offenders. One thing we've dealt a lot with is what we call home equity theft, which is someone underpays their taxes by a small amount by mistake, or doesn't know about a tax bill, and their whole house gets seized, sold at auction, and the government keeps all the proceeds. And it's a major problem in at least a dozen states right now that we've been fighting against. We've had some big wins in Michigan and elsewhere on that issue. So that's a state level issue, and so we need, and asset forfeiture is the same thing. The states are doing this. So those of us who are in states where that might be open to legislation or to reform, that's on us as citizens to push back and speak up and urge change at the state level. I think that's the biggest thing we can do right now is push for changes at the state level on some of these policies.
All right, the biggest thing that I want to ask now is this: circling back to New York, to Cuomo. Okay, so the guidance has been changed by the CDC and whatnot. If they were already violating while the guidance was to wear masks and all this, who's to say? First of all, are the CDC guidelines law now, or is that just recommendation? So let's say they keep the mask mandate on. They're not breaking a law, right? I wanted to know that.
So each state gets to decide what it does with the CDC guidance. New York just announced that starting, I believe, tomorrow, they're going to be following the CDC guidance. California has said that they're not going to be following it until June 15th. So for a whole other month, people are going to be required to wear masks when there's no medical reason for it. So it's really up to states to do so. Private businesses could keep requiring masks if they want to, even after a state lifts its mandate. There's no reason that a private business couldn't do so. So an individual business could still decide to do so. Individuals can still wear masks if they want to, but the mandates in most states they've gone away in light of the CDC guidance. I think it's time for that, but California is still for another month they're requiring masks for no reason at all, no medically justified reason.
Unbelievable. Well, and so I guess as we're seeing things be lifted by the CDC, is there a chance constitutional freedoms could still be violated simply by extending the guidance at all? Like, could they twist that into something that could be a violation? Well,
I think the problem you're getting at is that there's no end to this emergency necessarily. Governors could keep it going even after they're now lifting a lot of the requirements, the distancing limits, the capacity limits, but they're keeping their authority in place to enact new emergency orders when they want to. I haven't seen many governors say the emergency is over. We no longer need this power, and so we're hoping to see that happen quickly, so that states are no longer under the rule of government governors and the unelected bureaucrats that serve them, but they are back to the rule of law.
Well, that's all a mouthful. I got to rehear that and think about that. But thank you, Daniel, for reacting to all of this. And please come back as we see things go, as we see things lifted some places, not some places. I want your thoughts. And tell us how this case goes for Broadway.
Yeah, we will do for sure. Thanks so much for having me.
You got it. I'm Alex Garrett, where, of course, we're always adapting. We'll talk to you soon.
Wake up the members of my nation. It's your time to be. There's no chance.